Hi, I'm Madison Williams with Oklahoma Humanities, and I'm here to talk with Amber Sharples today about uh, her experience on the Oklahoma Arts Council and her experience with Oklahoma Humanities. So, to go ahead and start off, tell me a little bit about yourself.
My name is Amber Sharples. I'm the current executive director of the Oklahoma Arts Council, the state agency for the arts. I have been working here for 14 years and have been leading the agency for approximately 8 this May. And I have been very honored and pleased to have worked with former directors and Caroline Lowry at the Humanities, Oklahoma Humanities. And I'm excited about the 50th anniversary. I'm hoping that we can continue our partnership. We kind of started we're sister agencies, if you will. And we have a foundational background where we were one entity at one time and have split off to Oklahoma Humanities and now the Oklahoma Arts Council. But I think our work is very complementary still, and we build upon each other's work. So this is a great milestone.
So, you've only been with the Arts Council for 14 years. What do you know about the history between Oklahoma Humanities and the Arts Council before you joined?
So before I joined, I had absolutely no clue about either one of these agencies, these organizations. Since becoming the director, I've had to really dive in deeper into our history, which then gave me insight into our connection with Oklahoma Humanities. In 1965, President Johnson signed the National Foundation on the Arts and the Humanities Act, which declared that, quote, the arts and the humanities belong to all of the people of the United States, end quote. And then that became the vehicle in which federal dollars became available to states to create state arts agencies, which would match those federal dollars. So in 1964, Governor Henry Bellman appointed an advisory panel called the Governor's Council for Cultural Development. And this was to advise government on how to complete the interior design of the Capitol and to increase the awareness of Oklahomans about their cultural past. Governor Bellman asked Oklahoma City arts leader B. Hightower to be the chairman of the council. And the following year, in 1965, Governor Bellman signed the bill into law that created the Oklahoma Arts and Humanities Council and appointed a 15-member council, which required confirmation by the state Senate. Prior to that time, public funding for the arts and the humanities in Oklahoma was virtually non-existent. And then Governor Bellman gave $10,000 out of the governor's discretionary fund, and the agency was offered the seed money to then build smaller programs in the state and to get those matching federal dollars. And so when we were first created, our two sister entities, the arts and the humanities, were actually under one umbrella, and we were a state agency. So that's where Oklahoma Humanities, once was called Oklahoma Humanities Council, was born, and it was born with us. So we really share, a very strong connected background. In 1967, or by 1967, funding for touring performances was available to 8 towns. Visual arts and technical assistant programs began with almost $36,000 from the National Endowment for the Arts, and then $11,500 appropriated by the state legislature. And this is for arts and humanities work. The 1970s marked the growth of the arts in Oklahoma as prominent citizens became active supporters of our agency, and the programs that they promoted helped with an appreciation of the arts and humanities in all sections of the state. We also started working in our work that we still continue today, which is one of our biggest projects right now, which is artwork that would hang in the Capitol building, which was completely devoid of almost all artwork other than one piece of artwork in the interior, which is called Pro Patria, for one's country, which was done in 1926. So I'm trying to find where we kind of split off. I know that it was in the 70s, I believe. I think it was the early 1970s that we split off between the Oklahoma Arts Council and then Oklahoma Humanities really split off. Let me see if I can find that. I'm looking at some notes that I have on some early background history of our agency. Like I mentioned, in 1965, it was Senate Bill 469 of the 30th Oklahoma Legislature, which actually formed the Oklahoma Arts and Humanities Council. Like I mentioned, it was that governor's advisory board. The authors of the bill were Senator Denzel Garrison and Representative Ruth Patterson. So it's great history to know exactly who formed and authored the bill to create Oklahoma, what would become Oklahoma Humanities. In 1979, Governor George Nye signed Senate Bill 136, changing the name of the Oklahoma Arts and Humanities Council to the State Arts Council of Oklahoma. And this happened during the Governor's Arts Awards ceremonies at the Skirvin Plaza Hotel in Oklahoma City. Authors of that bill, 136, were Senator Roger Randall of Tulsa and Representative Mike Murphy of Idabel. And I do know in the 1970s, because of the growth that the Oklahoma Arts and Humanities Council had made, even just in a few years of its existence, I do know that they started to see a real need for both the arts sector and the humanities sector to be served individually, almost as if all of the needs of the state for both of those industries and areas of study and understanding and exposure and learning really needed to have a standalone organization to serve them. And so state arts councils in general, generally speaking across the nation, decided at the time in the 70s to stay as part of entities of state government. And humanities councils at the time, as they were called, many of those determined to go ahead and split off from state government and form their own 501c3 nonprofit organizations and operate as standalone nonprofits, with the arts councils across the nation still maintaining the strong connection with the National Endowment for the Arts, and the state humanities councils still maintaining strong ties and funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities. So we find ourselves today as two separate entities, and we function differently. As the state arts agency, we still are governmental, and then humanities councils like the Oklahoma Humanities being nonprofit standalone organizations. So still complementary in our work. I think we fund a lot of the same organizations, but yet we are now functioning very differently in some respects.
So you've experienced, working with Caroline like firsthand. What is that dynamic like? Like, how do you guys work together? You mentioned that you fund a lot of the same grants and stuff, but yeah.
Our staff, I mean, one of the things that we've tried to do when Anne was still director, one of the things that I hope that we can do post-pandemic is that our staff members have had a couple of, I would say, after hours functions to get to know each other better. I think one of the things that we find is that our agencies, both of our organizations, provide a lot of technical assistance, capacity building, professional development opportunities for both arts and humanities based organizations or organizations trying to leverage the arts and humanities for their work, whether that's social service or whatever area of mission driven work that they're doing. And knowing each other and having a good relationship on how to connect organizations to other individuals who can provide expertise is a really important piece of this, because we want to wrap around our services of not only the arts agency providing our expertise in the arts arena, but we also know that many of these organizations, if they're doing arts programming, will have humanities components, curatorial talks related to an exhibition. So we'll fund the hands-on arts experiences for students or for community members. And then the Humanities Council can help with support services or funding with those same entities to do more of the humanities-based programming, the talking about why, right? What the exhibition provides, the historical context, the social components. Those are things where we're complementary to one another, and we try to get our staff members to know each other and stay connected. So if an organization calls us, we can say, hey, the way that you're talking about this program, a humanities component of this is very, instrumental to your success. Why don't you talk to the Oklahoma Humanities about funding or ways that they can be involved? I think we do a lot of cross-promotional work. Both the Oklahoma Humanities and the Oklahoma Arts Council, at the heart of our organizations, is a dedication to rural Oklahoma, geographically isolated individuals having access to either the arts or the humanities. We share that in common, that we want, whether it's being rural or if they're under-resourced communities, how do we help equip those organizations to provide arts and/or humanities-based opportunities for Oklahomans to make our state better? We share a common goal of education, wanting well-rounded and creative students and civically engaged residents of our state, and the arts and the humanities are key to developing empathy and understanding of communities that maybe we look like, or that we don't look like, or that we are very familiar with, or that we're not familiar with. I think this helps us understand historical context, helps us understand who we are, and then we also share a common goal of cultural preservation, whether that's through folk, more living traditions, as well as other ways of engagement through artistic practice, or the capturing and study of, like, art history. Like, I'm an art historian by trade, actually, which is a humanities-based academic study, area of study. So the connection and overlap between the arts and humanities is so blurry. Many of us here at the Arts Council have humanities-based backgrounds, and yet we're trying to equip artists who are doing hands-on experiences in arts education. And I would say the same. There are many creatives, artists over at the humanities. And so the overlap and blurriness between the two lines of our organizations, I think, makes us really strong. And we're almost compelled to work together for a common purpose.
Can you name one of the projects that y'all have worked on together?
Well, one of the projects that I'm really familiar with, because at the time I was the collections manager of the state capitol, is the Oklahoma Humanities, and I can't remember what year it was, probably in the mid 2000s, like 2008, 2009. It's been 10, 15 years ago. Forgive me for my blurriness here. We had just unveiled the Oklahoma State Art Collection in the Betty Price Gallery in the Capitol, which was a 4,400 square foot gallery space, museum quality gallery space, that complemented the work of the art in the state capitol. So we had hundreds of linear feet of artwork that was celebrating and preserving Oklahoma's history, or the artwork created by Oklahomans. So really showcasing Oklahoma's kind of a visual anthology of artists who have produced artwork in our state. But we didn't have a way to really get the word out about it. And so the humanities, at the time known as Oklahoma Humanities Council at that point, I know approached our previous director, Suzanne Tate, while I was still the collections manager, and wanted to collaborate with our agency. And so Oklahoma Humanities paid for former Judge Robert Henry to go through the state capitol, as well as through the Oklahoma State Art Collection Gallery, and do a walkthrough interview on the Gallery Oklahoma series with OETA. And this became a CD, that's how old the technology is, a DVD, if you will, video of educational material to get students more engaged and use that as an educational tool for those collections. So that was a collaboration that Oklahoma Humanities helped offset the costs to do the video, the educational script, which I actually helped write because I was the collections manager at the time, along with the other members of our team here at the Arts Council. And this DVD obviously aired on OETA, so it became accessible to Oklahomans across the state through free TV access. But then the DVDs that were created, thousands of them, we then developed educational curriculum online on our website. And then we were able to send one of these DVDs to every school site across the state that registered with us. So this became a great educational outreach that was statewide, trying to remove the barriers of access. If students couldn't come to the Capitol to see the artwork in person, how could we leverage the arts and historical content of the arts collections and understanding of artists through more of a humanities-based experience of a lecture and tour of the Capitol. So that was called the People's Gallery for the State Art Collection. And then the Capitol Art tour was known as the People's Art. And I can get you copies of those as part of the, in fact, we just asked not too long ago, maybe a year or two ago, right before the Capitol renovation really took place and got up and running, we asked for OETA to re-air that because it was a very popular program. And I'm hoping that that is something that post the renovation, because we are rethinking the way that visitors will experience the Capitol building, that we can maybe partner again with Oklahoma Humanities and have a new tour developed and find ways to use current technology to get those experiences back into the classroom. Students need to see, we're gonna add numerous new works of art, and we're helping to fill out historic events that were not captured in the Capitol previously, but that students need to know about, including subjects like Black Wall Street, the Cats drugstore sit-ins in the mid to late 1980s or 1950s, 1958. These are really historic and very important events that have shaped not only civil rights in Oklahoma, but really the nation. And we are going to be commissioning new works, like a bronze bust of Clara Luper, civic rights leader. And so we want to take advantage of these new artworks and then make sure that students have the opportunity to learn about these individuals who changed history, not only in Oklahoma, but across the nation, and are internationally known for what they did. So I hope that we can continue and maybe revisit that project and give it maybe a new phase, a new life.
So obviously over the past 10 years, you mentioned, since you did that work at the Capitol, technology has changed a lot. How has, the changing technology allowed you to expand your outreach, especially with the Oklahoma Humanities?
It's a great question. Let me think about that for a second. I think most recently, with the pandemic really catapulting all of us into a different way of trying to serve, especially rural and under-resourced communities, we've had to be very intentional both at the Arts Council and at Oklahoma Humanities about how do we make sure that we're using technology as a means to remove barriers while keeping in mind that many Oklahomans still do not have broadband access, and that internet access is still a challenge and a barrier for access to the programs that we serve and support, but also all of the other capacities that we try to do, which is professional development for our respective sectors. I think one of the things that we're going to have to both collectively think about moving forward is how do we equip our sectors? In the past, over the numerous years that we've had a statewide arts conference known as the Oklahoma Arts Conference, we've been very intentional to include and invite the humanities leadership to present at our conference. We typically have 500 individuals plus from all sectors and areas of the state that come together. We've done those historically through in-person conferences, but now we're really going to have to shift about making it two-pronged. We can have the in-person piece of it once it's safe, but then we're going to also have to continue to have digital connections and seeing if we can leverage working with the humanities, Oklahoma Humanities, to reach out to those same communities that we're both serving. That happened both with the CARES funding. I've been in previous conversations just in the last few weeks with other statewide organizations like Oklahoma Humanities about being very intentional and strategic in how we talk about how we're going to use funding coming from the federal government and how we are thoughtful about how that money is distributed across the state, because we do fund some of the same entities. How do we make sure that we're trying to send that funding as far and as broad as possible, looking for ways that we are not, that we're being as strategic as possible to support both of our sectors. And so conversations via Zoom, but then picking up the telephone and then meeting in person, we're gonna have to use all of the resources and ways of communication to make sure that we are leveraging that in our decision-making as we're trying to serve those organizations all across the state. So it's a new era. It's a new era for all of us.
So talking a little bit more about grants, particularly before the pandemic, how similar were the grants to Oklahoma Humanities? Was the application process similar? Were you getting the same types of applicants?
No, I've never done a side-by-side comparison of our grantees. Do you have the data about
I actually do not.
and how many organizations they fund? I can't say with any kind of specificity that I feel confident in. I do know that we fund many of the same entities, especially in rural Oklahoma. I can think of, for example, a great organization that we both fund is the Sorghum Festival in Wewoka, which is organized by the Seminole Nation Historical Museum. This is an annual festival that typically happens, I believe it's in September or October of each fall. And the last time I went, there were 30,000 plus people in the streets of Wewoka for it is an arts and humanities based festival. We support the arts side of it, the musicians, the hands-on arts practices related to sorghum, the exhibitions in the Seminole Nation Historical Museum itself. And then the Humanities Council funds the pieces of the festival that have to do with the talking about the art or the history of sorghum and its impact on community and industry in the Wewoka area. So we fund similar festivals and events that have huge economic returns on investment and are really the lifeblood of rural Oklahoma, for example, but we support different components of it. So we're ensuring that the arts, hands-on learning or experiences and understanding and exposure to the arts is happening. And they are helping to ensure that understanding why that art is made, what its historical context or its change over time is, whether that's a living tradition like basket making or the culinary side of making sorghum through into different, whether it's like lollipops or syrup for pancakes or what it might be. They talk about that. So we want people to understand and have great hands-on experiences through the arts and a love and a passion for it. and get to use their creativity for more knowledge and understanding. And then the humanities really gets to talk about, why do we do these things? And what does it mean to us? What does it mean culturally? What does it mean in terms of how it's changed over time? And how does that reflect the people who've come before, and the sharing of knowledge to perpetuate from one generation to the next? So we can't have one piece without the other. We can't do it but not understand it. And then they help us understand why we do what we do. So I think the Sorghum Festival is a very fun festival to attend. And yet we know that by both investing in it as organizations, we know that we're investing in that community and its lifeblood. I don't know what our grant applications look like in that space and what they're asking for and what we're asking for, but I feel like we come to the same conclusion that it's an important event to support.
So you've mentioned multiple times that the humanities helps give context to the arts. What does the arts, give to the humanities?
The humanities help us explain why we're human. But if we didn't have the arts, I think it is the essential piece that makes us the human species, that we're creatives, that we can create something from nothing, that we have original ideas, that we try to interpret and understand our meaning in the world, and we create beautiful things to help us understand, whether that's oral histories, and then when we create something that represents the meanings of those pieces to us as populations or communities. The humanities helps us kind of dissect the complexities around our creative spirit as a species. And then I think the arts keep life worth living in some ways, that we get to have an outlet as we try to, navigate through this journey called life and try to understand who we are, where we come from, our history and our background, and kind of where we're going.
So the arts keep life worth living. How have the arts impacted your life individually?
Well, I'm a hobbyist dancer for fun. I feel like my personal experience has been, I studied art history because I love to understand the why. That is the humanities piece of. I was very drawn to visual arts and wanted to understand it more. And I loved the context of pulling in the societal complexities, the economic connection, the cultural connection of the creation and evolution of art over time, and how it represents various communities, and how it helps us understand and have more of an openness and appreciation for what it means to be in this life. And then, as I've gotten older, I've discovered the importance of other genres like dance that I like to do. I like it because it keeps me challenged. It's hard. It physically helps me have an outlet for stress. And then it just keeps me as a curious person. I think it helps me grow as an individual, helps me age. I hope it helps me age well and more in a healthy, both mental health, from a mental health standpoint in terms of stress relief, and just keeps me creative in different ways that are challenging. I like that. I like to be a curious learner. And I think the arts can be a great tool to keep us physically and mentally engaged as we have different phases and experiences of life. I haven't put down my humanities books, though, because I think that with that, I've still hopefully remained a curious individual in terms of understanding the why of how the arts have changed over time, and wanting to have a better understanding as new discoveries are made or as new conversations are made in the art space. It's really interesting to see how the humanities really try to break that down and help us understand why those changes or those new ways of artistic expression are emerging, and then how that reflects where we are as a society, and how that helps us understand whether it's the political, the societal landscape, our values and principles, civil engagement, civic engagement. I mean, just the arts are such a place where you can kind of dive into some very deep conversations and understanding, and you kind of never get to the end. You can almost keep trying to find more information and growing. So I think that's why it retains our attention.
While serving on the Arts Council, have you been able to see anyone else come to love the arts, or see why things happened, with the humanities and stuff? Have you seen any of those fruits, like from programs like the Sorghum Festival?
Yes. I mean, I think just walking downtown Wewoka, just seeing, hundreds of individuals completely engaged in watching reenactments or listening to music, seeing families connect, seeing people from all walks of life in the same space, enjoying many of the same things. I think that just the sense of community that it creates is key. There are hundreds of stories, if not thousands. We fund on an annual basis more than $2 million, closer to $2.5 million in grant making across the state to ensure arts education and arts access. So there are thousands of stories. Last year we had close to 500 grants, 500 standalone, either hands-on arts education or arts access experiences. And in the reports, there are so many conversations, whether it's from teachers talking about students lighting up, coming to school. They'll come on the days that arts are provided, and other days it's really hard to get those students to class. We know that it changes people's daily quality of life. So there are lots of stories. I can get you some of those statements. I think about, Kima, I think about Woody Guthrie, just like one of the first festivals that the Arts Council and the Humanities, when we were together, one of the first things that we ever did together was to help kind of spur the creation of the Woody Guthrie Folk Festival in Okima, America, right? A very small rural community, and how that has turned over time into an international. I mean, the last time I went to the Woody Guthrie Festival a few years ago, there were individuals from Europe who had come across to the United States to experience Woody Guthrie's music and his legacy through other folk musicians who were keeping it alive. I think about how that puts Oklahoma on the international stage when it comes to music. And it also is a huge economic tool and resource for that community, but it's also about identity. And it also helps keep folk musicians, giving them spaces to play and keeping our connection with those roots. I think about, so I think about how something so small can then have such a huge reach, and kind of the potential is endless. So I'm hoping that we can kind of continue to draw on that and do that in more communities. And I think the humanities, we all want to understand the lyrics of Woody Guthrie, and it is poetry. So I think about how that then translates to what we consider the literary arts, but really that is the line on the humanities about how the power of words. One of the ways that we do, we have had a strong connection with the Oklahoma Humanities is that back and forth, the Arts Council and the Oklahoma Humanities have taken turns managing the state's selection of the Oklahoma State Poet Laureate which is a 2-year appointment by the state of Oklahoma by the governor's office. But the Oklahoma Humanities and the State Arts Council, the Oklahoma Arts Council, we have taken turns managing the process of bringing nominations to the governor's office for consideration over its multi-decades of existence. And while that's more of an ambassadorship role across the state, it just shows that the literary arts, spoken word, poetry, and our two organizations are really connected. That then led to the same experience with managing the Oklahoma, the Poetry Out Loud program. Both the Oklahoma Humanities and the Oklahoma Arts Council have managed the Poetry Out Loud program. And this is a program geared towards high school students that's statewide. And it was only in the last 10 years that the Oklahoma Arts Council was approached by the Oklahoma Humanities to take back both of those programs, as the Oklahoma Arts Council really started to spearhead and focus on leveraging with spoken word, improv and some other areas became more popular with students as a means of expression. Then we started to see the need to try to create a pipeline for student engagement in poetry. So Oklahoma Humanities approached me when I first became director in 2013 and asked if we would be interested in taking back the Oklahoma Poetry Out Loud program, which is also replicated in other states. It's all across the nation each year, the Poetry Out Loud program. And then the winner of Oklahoma's Poetry Out Loud program goes into the national competition in Washington, D.C. to compete on the national stage. And then we also, right after taking back the Poetry Out Loud program, then also took over the Oklahoma Poet Laureate selection process. And each year, it's a 2-year appointment. Each 2-year cycle, when we have the nomination process as well as the selection, we always have someone from the Oklahoma Humanities Council, their expertise on the panel that makes the nomination for the governor. So we're constantly relying on each other's expertise in this space, and knowledge and understanding. The literary arts is kind of a shared area because the line between poetry being more of a humanities-based discipline and genre, whereas when you think about spoken word, there's a sense of performance and more creative artistic expression of original words, whereas poetry can sometimes be reciting the words of other artists. That line gets so blurry that it almost takes both of us to support that area across the state. So there's some great ways that we still work kind of hand in hand. Am I talking too much? I hope I'm answering it.
No, you're good.
Went too long?
No, if you feel like it needs to be said, it needs to be said. I'm just here to listen to you talk. So the more you talk, the better.
Yeah.
Are there any struggles with your outreach on the arts?
Oh, constantly. There are so many organizations that don't function as traditional nonprofit organizations, but that they are the cultural hubs of their community. This particularly happens in Black, Indigenous, and people of color focused organizations that are really trying to provide events or educational outreach through the arts and or the humanities that is specifically tailored to their respective communities. These happen in churches. These are programs and events that happen in places of faith, or they happen in maybe some non-traditional, or maybe what we consider traditional spaces, like an arts museum, or they're happening in other places, whether that's libraries or even in someone's home, or in public spaces like parks or other community centers. And so the challenge, I think, is that the first 50 years of the creation of both the Oklahoma Arts Council and what is now Oklahoma Humanities, is that for the first 50 years, we were really driven towards building up the infrastructure of nonprofit organizations, incentivizing through our grant making to ensure that organizations would have the confidence that they would receive public funding, seed funding for their work, whether that was a small to medium-sized organization, a volunteer-run organization in many of our communities, to the more larger scale organizations like the ballets, the symphonies, etc., that were providing arts and humanities-based programs. We have now built an incredible ecosystem across the state. There are thousands of organizations doing incredible work. But now we see that maybe that 501c3 traditional nonprofit, and I say traditional in the sense that a very formalized approach, when I mean that, of using a nonprofit organization that has staff or volunteers, that is governed by a citizen board, that does not always meet the needs of all communities. And so I think the Oklahoma Humanities and the Oklahoma Arts Council, one of our largest and most substantial challenges for the future is we have rules and we have guidelines and we have structures and parameters in the way that we operate. Our agency as a state entity of government, Oklahoma Humanities as its own nonprofit that works with the federal agency for the humanities, we have a lot of constraints about who and how we can fund our respective areas. But the world is changing. Technology has consumption of arts and humanities-based programming is not always in a theater or in a museum space. Now we're seeing it put into digital forums. Our genres are changing and evolving so quickly that we as entities are having a hard time staying up to speed on serving and supporting the infrastructure and the sectors across our state, that the format and the pace in which we need to pivot in order to stay relevant and keep up to speed on how people are consuming arts and humanities-based programs and educational opportunities is really a challenge, because we were kind of built for a very with a skeleton that fit a certain population and demographic and a way of operating and consuming the arts and the humanities. And we, I think, over time have realized that it is much more expansive, that we are having to step into questions of equity, inclusiveness, diversity, accessibility in very meaningful and intentional ways. And that means we're going to have to really think about how we operate and figure out how do we stay relevant, how do we move and pivot that reflects the way that people live and the way that we share and communicate and consume both cultural information and experiences, but then also how do we share that, and how do we make sure that those barriers that the digital realm presents, it presents great opportunities, but for those communities that we still say we know may have the largest barriers to that consumption or accessibility, communities of color, impoverished communities, rural communities, if we don't do something to take on some of those challenges, the digital age is going to be very challenging for both our sectors.
So, what do you think, or rather, what have you guys done already to try to overcome that struggle?
Well, just in terms of the pandemic, one of the first things that prior to the pandemic, our funding could not support virtually based programming, arts education, or arts experiences. When we realized in the early weeks of the pandemic that organizations, for the safety of their audiences, for the safety of their companies, their theater companies, their dance companies, their artistic personnel, anyone that they were working with, that they weren't going to be able to, we couldn't, nor did we want to force in-person arts education learning for students who were trying to do hybrid or online learning, and or audiences were not going to be able to experience the arts in the ways that they had previously consumed. Exhibitions, performances, musical, concerts, orchestras across the entire, right? Across the entire spectrum of the work that we had supported before. So one of the first things that we did was we drafted recommended guidelines for our grantees that took into consideration that they were going to have to pivot in this space. And this then allowed for virtual programming, whether it was educational or accessibility focused. So that was one of the first things that in the first few weeks, we had to completely change. And that was a huge shift for us, but we wanted to make sure that we empowered these organizations to still do the work that they were doing, but just finding the digital platform to do it. We also wrestled as an agency with all the questions that come with that. What if kids at home don't have internet? Are we leaving them behind? Because that barrier is still there. So while we're creating these wonderful online curriculum and tools for arts education at home, what about parents who are having to work 2 jobs? I happen to be a single parent, and I know that it is incredibly difficult to try to work from home and then try to teach your child at home, right? Just in terms of bandwidth. So we had to really wrestle with some of those questions too, that it wasn't perfect. Perfection is the enemy of good. So we just tried to do what was good in that space and try to shift. We also knew that audiences, who has the free time and the means to consume a concert online, that may not be all the members of your respective community. It may be a smaller subset or individuals who already have some of the privilege of having those resources. And we knew that that meant that some individuals and residents in respective communities may not truly have access to those experiences. So those are things that we post the pandemic, current to the pandemic, or our current guidelines. But we're going to have to wrestle with this in the post-pandemic era. What does it mean now that we do have consumption of the arts in a digital realm and sphere? But how do we, is it a hybrid? Are we going to then have organizations provide in-person and online opportunities? Will that then expand the individuals and residents who get to enjoy and have exposure and consumption of those arts education, arts access programs? These are things that we do not have answered, but these are the questions that my staff and we are wrestling with constantly, and it is constantly changing as we have more information and we are learning. But I think this is something that the humanities and the arts, we're both going to have to wrestle with and come up with very creative ways to stay relevant and to still challenge and make sure that the barriers that we know exist, we're not putting up additional barriers by trying to use technology as a tool. It is not a solution. It has to be a tool, but then we also have to think about the complexities of what it presents in terms of access.
So, how important do you think the arts and humanities are to society? Do you think it helps further, culture, the understanding of culture? Uh, to what extent?
I think it is absolutely essential for arts and humanities to be an enriching part of the daily life of every Oklahoman. I see it as the arts and humanities are critical in educational development, creative thinking, um, problem solving skills for students, regardless of the career path that they take and choose for themselves. That the arts and the humanities um, help form qualities and characteristics of empathy, inclusion, a sense of belonging, a sense of community, and it also provides outcomes such as discipline, commitment, uh, higher graduation rates, and it just helps individuals have a better quality of life day in and day out. You know, during the pandemic, I think most individuals became more heightenedly aware of how much they consumed arts and humanities based programs and information in order to navigate the incredible emotional and mental health toll of the pandemic, the sense of isolation, the arts programs, the humanities, reading books, listening to lectures, listening to concerts, looking at art, having conversations around these spaces um, were key to keeping us more resilient, more connected in a place where we can no longer be physically within spaces to share and create things. While it was in a digital realm, it became kind of the lifeblood of how we were getting through the day in and day out. I know it was for me. I'm still taking dance classes via Zoom. I haven't resumed in-person dance classes, and if I didn't have my dance classes 2 or 3 times a week, I wonder sometimes how I might have been able to navigate the incredible emotional toll that the pandemic took in terms of my sense of isolation. But even just having my dance community, just being with them, moving my body, learning, and having some place where it felt like maybe the pandemic wasn't just pushing down on me and I had a sense of just creating, were such important outlets. So I think with the experience that I had, and I'm assuming that that's replicated with most individuals, that it really was so important to getting us through this stressful time. And I'm hoping on the other side of this that there's an appreciation and a sense of gratitude for our creatives, because while they were having to pivot because of the pandemic and losing opportunities to perform and to bring their artistic knowledge and passion to us through whatever vehicle they use and present, they were asked to be incredibly innovative in a time when it was extremely taxing on all of us. And we all kind of leaned in on our creatives to help save the day. So I hope that we all kind of walk away from this experience with a sense of gratitude for what the creative industry has done, and how they have been so resourceful in trying to find creative ways to get that consumption to us to help us navigate a really hard year. And so, on the other side, I think these community experiences, festivals, exhibitions, concerts, I think every person I ever talk to talks about how one of the first things they want to do is get into a music venue and listen to live music. Because while it is amazing to listen to music on a Zoom or on YouTube, and it does nourish your soul, there is nothing like actually feeling the vibration of music on your body, getting a sense that you are in a community of people who love the same sense, the same lyrics, the same style. You share this in common, it brings you together. A musician singing about life experiences, and you have this sense of community around you. I think we long for that. I hope on the other side of that, that we don't take that for granted, because it is something that we want to. I'm hoping our artists are elevated in their importance. Because I would say, kind of behind the healthcare sector, which saved people's lives, the artists, I felt like, kind of saved our souls during this period and kept us, kept us from the taxing nature of what was a really difficult, 12 to 15 months. So we're going to have to, I think that it's an important key element of our daily existence. So I'm looking forward to how creative and innovative people are going to be post-pandemic too. I think out of any type of pandemic, historically over kind of human experience, the Roaring '20s came after the pandemic, the Spanish flu pandemic, right, of 1918. And then the Roaring '20s came right after that, because the pandemic had such huge implications on the way that people thought and the sense of loss, but there was such a kind of embrace of life that I really do think that we're on the cusp, once this pandemic kind of comes to an end, that we're going to be on a cusp of great innovation in the arts. So the best, hopefully, is yet to come. I think the next decade is going to be really good in some ways, in terms of
a second Roaring '20s.
Exactly. Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah. That is just about all that I have for you today. Is there anything else you would like to say before we sign off?
No, I wish I would have maybe done a little bit better job of preparing. I want to see if there's anything. I just want to say congratulations to the Oklahoma Humanities for the 50th anniversary. It's a big milestone. It's a great place to look back on the first 50 years and think about what you've accomplished and what you've done. And I think we have one of the best humanities councils in the country. I think Oklahoma is very fortunate to have had really strong leaders at the humanities, Oklahoma Humanities. I think the best, I hope, is yet to come. I look forward to continuing to partner. We need each other. We can't do it without each other. So I just look forward to working with Caroline and her team and the board. And thanks for what you're doing. I think it's so important that you're spending time in this space and helping to document this. Oral history is kind of a lost art, if you will. In some ways, I think that we're not leaning on it as heavily because we have some other digital platforms, and we think that that's going to help us keep track of what's been done. But I think what you're doing is really important for the people who are looking at this many years to come, and to help fill in the gaps and help us understand how far we've come and how far we need to go. Are you guys going to do a time capsule?
That's a really good question. I don't know.
It'd be fun.
That would be really cool, though. Yeah, it'd be fun.
I think it'd be fun. A time capsule would be great.
Yeah. I know that they do have some more stuff planned. I'm not exactly sure what, but some primary source research and other things. Uh, but thank you so much for taking your time to talk to me today.
Yeah,
It was a pleasure.
thank you.